Tonight on Primetime, America's blockade of the Strait of Hormuz comes into full effect. Worldwide concern continues, while China condemns the move as dangerous and irresponsible. So, can negotiations survive this latest move by Washington? Good evening. The US blockade of Iranian ports is now in effect after President Donald Trump ordered the move following failed talks in Islamabad. So what does this mean for the Strait of Hormuz, and how far could this escalate?
Tensions are rapidly escalating in the Middle East as Donald Trump orders a sweeping US naval blockade targeting Iranian ports. Trump warned that any Iranian vessels approaching US forces in the Strait of Hormuz would be immediately eliminated, signaling a major escalation in military posture. According to United States Central Command, the blockade began Monday, restricting all maritime traffic to and from Iranian ports, while allowing passage for ships not linked to Iran. Iran has responded with strong warnings. Officials say their armed forces are on maximum alert, vowing a decisive response to any aggression. Tehran has also accused Washington of piracy as protests erupted in the capital. Meanwhile, Benjamin Netanyahu expressed support for the US move, saying Israel is closely coordinating with Washington and warning a fragile ceasefire could soon collapse. US Vice President J.D. Vance said the path forward depends on Iran, urging Tehran to abandon nuclear ambitions and reopen the strait fully to global trade.
Is that we need to see the Straits of Hormuz fully open. And this is frankly one of the things where the Iranians tried to move the goalposts during the negotiation. We made very clear that that's unacceptable. We came to the negotiation saying the United States, what we've given here is a ceasefire. We've stopped bombing the country. What we expect the Iranians to give up is a full reopening of the Straits of Hormuz. We have seen, as the president has said, some significant uptick in traffic coming through the Straits of Hormuz. That's good for the global economy.
Despite rising tensions, NATO allies, including Britain and France, have declined to participate in the blockade, instead pushing for diplomatic efforts to reopen the critical shipping route, which carries roughly 1/5 of the world's oil supply. As both sides dig in, concerns are mounting over the risk of wider conflict and its impact on global energy markets.
Well, global concern is growing over disruption in the Strait of Hormuz. Maritime officials and world leaders are calling for calm and warning against blocking vital trade routes.
Secretary General of the International Maritime Organization, Arsenio Dominguez, said on Monday that no country has the right to blockade international straits used for international transit.
Because of the conflict, it is not safe for the ships to transit through these corridors, and this is what is actually stopping this. But legally speaking, in accordance to international law, no countries have the right to prohibit the right of innocent passage or the freedom of navigation through international straits that are used for international transit.
Dominguez also told reporters the IMO, as a rule-maker and coordinator, has been working with member states and United Nations agencies to prevent escalation. Meanwhile, UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has called for continued dialogue, highlighting the global importance of the Strait of Hormuz. UN spokesperson Stéphane Dujarric delivered his messages on Monday.
The Secretary General stresses that all parties to this conflict must respect freedom of navigation, including in the Strait of Hormuz, in line with international law. Disruptions in the maritime trade through the Strait of Hormuz have already had a direct impact well beyond the immediate region, with increased global economic fragility and insecurity in many sectors.
Global energy markets are also under pressure. The International Energy Agency has urged countries not to hoard supplies or impose export controls, warning this could worsen what it describes as the biggest shock ever to the global energy market.
So we have released 400 million barrels of oil, which is the largest in the history. And it is hitting the markets. I am very happy with that. We have seen that the prices went down by almost $20. It is good. But this is not the solution. This is only reducing the pain. The solution goes through opening up the Strait of Hormuz fully to the trade.
The United States NATO allies, including Britain and France, say they will not take part in any blockade. Instead, they are calling for the waterway to be reopened. French President Emmanuel Macron said France will organise a conference with Britain and other countries to create a multinational mission to restore navigation in the strait.
Well, let's bring in Mark Voyager now. He's president of King's, the Kyiv Institute of National and Global Security, and a former special advisor on Russian and Eurasian affairs to the commanding general of the US Army in Europe. Mark, it's great to have you with us. Thank you very much for joining us on Primetime tonight. Let's start with the fundamentals, if we may. From a military standpoint, how significant then is this move?
Guy, good evening. Thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure to be on your show. The military importance of this move cannot be emphasized enough. Of course, because that would draw significant U.S. assets, substantial resources, naval assets, of course, air assets, and potentially special forces, etc., toward the region. That is a qualitative and quantitative change compared to the previous stage of the operation, because now we would have, as I said, U.S. naval vessels in direct proximity to the Iranian ports, the Iranian shoreline, of course, the Hormuz Strait, which would create opportunities for Iran to actually strike at some of those assets. So there are, this move comes as the maybe next logical step in an escalation ladder in a game in which, unfortunately, the U.S. administration of Donald Trump has entered a month and a half without a clear strategic plan. The tactical prowess of the U.S. military has been demonstrated clearly for the whole world to see. But unfortunately, tactical domination or any operational activities of this nature cannot substitute for the absence of a clear strategic vision of where we're going, what we need to achieve. Therefore, I suspect that this will be yet another step in this escalation ladder or spiral that we're going to see more and more of that in the coming weeks and potentially months.
Yeah, you mentioned the tactics there, escalation. I mean, give us an insight into the thinking, the strategic thinking behind this move, Mark. Is it primarily about deterrence, or are we looking at the early stages of very deliberate and calculated escalation?
Well, effectively, the Iranians have learned and have realized, and they have known it for quite some time. We've seen this game. We've been there before, 4 decades ago, when the U.S. Navy was also forced to escort actually tankers from various nations across the Persian Gulf and the Hormuz Strait. And so in this case, the Iranians are playing their card, their trump card, ironically, no pun intended, of blockading the Hormuz Strait. Knowing full well that the U.S. would, the West writ large cannot allow for this vital, thoroughfare, so to speak, or choke point to be blocked indefinitely. I mean, we see what's happening globally with the price of energy and oil, and therefore it's an attempt, I would say, a desperate attempt by the Trump administration to break through this encirclement, Iranian encirclement, in a way of the and sort of to change the rule of the chessboard in the Persian Gulf. Again, by committing more assets which are in direct proximity to the Iranian shore, to the Iranian landmass, and because the nature of the warfare globally has changed, using not only large naval vessels or long-range airplanes, but also drones, especially naval drones, submarine drones. And other smaller and much cheaper systems that can destroy larger systems, such as the ones that we have there. I fear that the Iranians will use their advantage in that regard against our own U.S. naval assets there.
And when you look at the rhetoric from Washington is always, now we're well used to it, always positive, always triumphant, always victorious. But underneath that rhetoric, when you look at the detail of the operations, how difficult is it to actually sustain an operation like this, to actually make sure that a blockade happens in its entirety?
Well, the rhetoric coming out of D.C. means nothing really for the for the situation on the ground, which requires, as I said, serious efforts, serious assets to be committed. The absence of a strategic plan means that the operation has not been thought through extensively. I mean, there are ways, ends and means usually that go into this formula, so to speak, of planning such operations at the strategic level, but also at the operational level. And so, unfortunately, this move, it would require a substantial efforts. I mean, substantial presence, financial commitment, also the grit. The resilience on the part of the U.S. to stay there and to go it alone. We're hearing about a Western European coalition. Of course, they'll be facing similar problems. So the same Iranian drones can hit, Western European naval assets the way they do American assets if Iran goes that route. And so we are again facing a spiraling escalation. And I don't think the U.S. administration of Donald Trump has any significant, plan of how to go about this. It's just they're trying different ways to squeeze Iran, to put pressure on it, and there's no end in the offing at this point.
Because one would have thought, Mark, that it's such a sensitive area, it's such a relatively confined area, that the risk of miscalculation here is presumably pretty high.
It's very high, especially, as I said, given the proximity of all those assets to the, various, obviously, tankers, various commercial ships from effectively all, regions of the world. So imagine the context whereby the Iranians have dispersed mines across the strait and areas of the Gulf. Which, by the way, from what I'm reading, even the Iranians may not know exactly where most of those mines are. So this is a highly dangerous situation whereby if a U.S. vessel is hit or heaven forbid, sunk by a mine or by a drone, that would lead to even more escalatory actions on behalf of both the U.S. and then ultimately Iran. It's a tit-for-tat situation. Again, the Straits of Hormuz have to be obviously unblocked. They have to be opened. I mean, we have to protect the freedom of navigation. And of course, nobody's going to cry for the Iranian regime, which is as repressive as ever, if not more. But the fact that the Trump administration had no initial plan, a strategic vision of where they wanted to go, and now they're trying to substitute the absence of clear delineated steps with rhetoric and with piecemeal actions and escalatory moves of this nature, which again I suspect will take a long time. I mean, yes, an international coalition may have to be committed also to this theater, but it's not going to happen over a course of a couple of days or even a couple of weeks or months.
And finally, we got some small nuggets of hope in terms of areas of potential agreement, possibly. It was not all doom and gloom emerging from the previous peace talks. We've now got proposed new talks on the horizon. Is there any realistic chance, do you think, of de-escalation and some kind of agreement coming in the coming days and weeks?
Well, if both parties, so figuratively speaking, got each other by the throat in a chokehold, to use this analogy, maybe at some point both Iran and the U.S. Would decide our victory and withdraw and try to de-escalate. But that doesn't mean that the conflict will subside for the long run. I mean, I don't see how Iran on their nuclear ambitions or missile technology or drone manufacturing, for that matter, which has performed so well for them. So maybe a temporary respite, yes, that's still, we cannot rule it out. But the contradictions and the potential conflict there will remain. This blockade will not change things, and of course the price of oil keeps rising, especially Russian, Siberian, Urals oil, which adds more kind of fuel to the war in Ukraine. So as everything is global and interconnected, and the Hormuz Strait is a trough of global importance, which unfortunately now is at the center stage of a potential escalatory in the entire region.
Mr. Vojjo, it's been great to have you on the show. Thank you very much indeed for your analysis.
Thank you, guys.
Okay, after the break, we'll take a look at what to expect as foreign ministers from the Organization of Turkic States prepare to meet in Antalya. Don't go away. A warm welcome back to Primetime, wherever you're watching. Now, foreign ministers from the Organization of Turkic States are gathering in Antalya for an informal meeting, a chance to exchange views and take stock of regional priorities. Well, it's taking place on the sidelines of the Antalya Diplomacy Forum, running from April the 17th to the 19th. Senior officials and diplomats are set to gather under the theme Mapping Tomorrow, Managing Uncertainties, looking at both regional pressures and wider global challenges. Well, the expectation is that this will act as a platform to deepen coordination across political, economic and regional priorities among member states. Okay, let's bring in now A News' Anastasia Lavrina, who's been following what to expect from the gathering in Antalya. Anastasia, very good indeed to see you there, particularly welcoming you back from your intrepid travels for the documentaries we've all been enjoying. Just give us a sense how important this meeting is then that's been taking place.
Well, indeed, that's one of the most important events which will take place, as it was rightly pointed out, in Antalya just in a couple of days. I had a chance to attend the first Antalya Diplomacy Forum, which took place in 2021, and already at that time it gathered together so many policymakers, so many diplomats from many countries, journalists and experts who had a real opportunity to approach the high-level official and ask a question if needed. A lot of sideline events, the forums and the talks are taking place. So for journalists, it's a very good platform. But as for this particular fifth edition of this forum, it will gather together the participants from 155 countries, over 20 head of states and governments, ministers of foreign affairs, representatives of the international organizations. And I guess 2 days in our fragmented world, where there are so many geopolitical movements, changes, specifically specifically on what is taking place in the Middle East. Its event have a significant importance for all the participants. To have an opportunity to have a chance to discuss the most urgent issues, to have, let's say, to monitor what is happening in different parts of the world, and to see on how the countries may proceed all together future to, let's say, work together on the stabilization of the situation in many regions. But in my mind, the Middle East will be one of the hot topic discussion there, of course, taking into account on what is taken there, the direct talks between Iran and the United States, which took place just recently in Islamabad in Pakistan, and most of the experts already say that that was a unique, historic meeting. First direct talk between two delegations, two sides since 1979 Islamic Revolution. So I guess it should be on the agenda as well. And as you rightly pointed out before, the Organization of Turkic States, the war in the Middle East showed how important the coordination between the countries in our region. And from Azerbaijan, a high-level delegation is expected to take place at that forum. So for Azerbaijan, it's also a unique opportunity to express its position on the global issues and to show once again the important role Azerbaijan is playing in all of those new projects and initiatives that are on the agenda.
Yeah, now it's been described as informal, but of course that doesn't mean unimportant. In fact, in many senses, it can actually mean that it's a sort of weightier set of talks, so the ties come off, the cameras come down. It's a chance to actually get into the detail of some of these issues.
Yeah, absolutely. Specifically for the heads of the state, that's a unique chance to meet, to have a bilateral meetings on the sideline of the event, probably out of the record, to find out on the positions, the specific attitude to the situations and the global agenda. Then it's always good to have early stage agreements on different elements and in different partnership like energy, trade, cooperation. Taking into account the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, the energy issues is still matter indeed for many countries in the world, from Asia to Europe, for China, for India, for European countries who are trying to bring down the conflict, but still there are a lot of issues and discussions. So at the sideline of this event, at this forum, probably the head of the states, the head of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs will have indeed a good opportunity to express the views, to analyze what's going on in the region. And it's a good quiet coordination before formal deals are signed actually elsewhere. So this time probably the Ministers of Foreign Affairs will discuss in details of the upcoming events and the agreements which will take place after. And if there's some more discussion will take place on the situation around Gaza. Before the escalation in the Middle East, indeed, that was so much discussion with the initiative of Donald Trump Board of Peace on how to deal with this issue. Then the escalation in the Middle East, I will say, changed everything on the global agenda, and now probably this is a time to come back to this urgent issue as well. And if I'm not mistaken, from what I read from the agenda of this forum, the head of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Turkey will actually participate in many talks at this forum, including the discussion of the future coordination and work of the member states of the Organization of Turkic States. As I mentioned, the situation in between of Gaza and Israel, and as I mentioned also before, probably the situation around the Middle East. And you say that probably it's informal, but we cannot ignore the fact that the president of Turkey, Recep Tayyip Erdogan himself personally is going to attend this event together with, if I'm not mistaken, around 20 head of states and governments. The president of Kazakhstan also, as it's mentioned in the agenda. Well, so it's officially unofficial meeting for head of the states to decide on how to proceed further.
Relatively informal.
Yeah, absolutely.
And in terms of the Baku perspective, Anastasia, what will the Azerbaijani delegation have in mind as they approach these talks?
From what we see on the agenda, for Azerbaijan, and I would like to highlight each year for Azerbaijan, there is a unique opportunity also for Azerbaijani delegation to participate in the sideline meetings to explain its position on the regional and global matters. I'm more than sure that most of the issues will be also related to the regional development from the energy perspective, diversification, importance of the escalation situation in the Middle East and how Azerbaijan actually is helping and helped before to evacuate so many people and diplomats from Iran through the territory of Azerbaijan. It has to be highlighted again. Then on how the future post-conflict development between Armenia and Azerbaijan is happening here in the region. Just recently, the experts from Armenia visited Azerbaijan. 3 days meeting in Gabala in Azerbaijan took place. Yes. And so many journalists, so many media actually highlighted on the events on what was going there. The peace agenda is a very important. Upcoming election in Armenia and how Armenia is getting ready for this, taking into consideration the work of its opposition parties and all of those forces who are not willing to see the peaceful coexistence with Azerbaijan. But from that meeting in Gabala, we could see that indeed the civil society representatives are willing to see the peaceful coexistence and even cooperation, integration, connection between two countries in the South Caucasus. As we can see, indeed, the cooperation is going quite smoothly from the energy perspective, economic perspective, and Armenia indeed has a real chance for the first time in its modern history to become a transit state in the region. All of this is a very important issues which are having big interest for many countries in the world, and for Azerbaijan delegation, it's a good chance once again to express the position of Azerbaijan, the role it can play as a mediator in the future, as a huge its huge role it can play as a reliable energy partner for many countries in the world, in particular from the perspective of cooperation with European countries at the moment. The future of coordination with the superpowers, global powers, the stance of Azerbaijan. So indeed, that's a good perspective, and we should expect very active participation of each member of our delegation.
And in terms of that diverse range of different members that are participating, broadly speaking, on the big issues, are we seeing alignment? And if not, are there still some key points of difference?
I guess we have to mention the differences between the global superpowers. We cannot ignore the fact that there is still 5 permanent members of the United Nations Security Council, and China, Russia, United States have, in most of the cases, completely different attitude to the situations in different parts of the world. And we cannot ignore the fact that it was President of Turkey, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, who firstly pointed out the importance to, let's say, give the power to more countries, like the world is bigger than 5, mentioning that not only 5 member states of the United Nations Security Council should have a veto power. So probably this time we have to agree that in each conflict, in each part of the world, you rightly pointed out in the beginning, we just back from the South Korea, and even there in the region there, we could see the divides in between of the interests of the superpowers, whether it's China or Russia, who has better relations with North Korea, or its strong presence of the United States in the south part of Korea, in the South Korea. So the division is presence in each part of the world in the Middle East. Probably that's one of the reasons why we can see so many fragmentations in the world. And now all attention again is on what is happening in the Middle East. Probably if there is another round of negotiation in between of the delegations of the United States and Iran, maybe if there is a direct talk, they can find some solutions and some decisions on what is going on, solution and to end this conflict. But when it comes to the other parts, even at these conferences, we should expect there will be some, let's say, the situation in the Middle East, some pro-Israeli forces, some pro-Iranian forces, all of those who are trying to promote and present its own position as the only one which is right. The fragmentation is expected, it exists, but as it's happened between Azerbaijan and Armenia, in most of the cases, the best solution is to have a direct talks between two parties, between two sides. If the interests of the global power are not involved to the conversation in between of two fighting sides, then it's much easier to find the solution for the long-lasting conflict or to end the war which has just started. Azerbaijan experienced on its own, the region of the South Caucasus experienced it on its own, and luckily 2 countries in our region, Azerbaijan and Armenia, were able to stabilize their relations, and now working on the conclusion of the final peace agreement. I think, it's my personal opinion, that if there is a direct talk between the fighting sides, of course there will be more chances to find a solution.
Yeah, in terms of those solutions, obviously a huge amount to discuss, lots of contentious issues. Nevertheless, an enormous amount of decision-making power all converging on Antalya. What are we expecting in terms of tangible outcomes from the meeting?
At least we will listen the stance and position of I will say most of the participants, specifically if it's the high-level officials who will have a chance to attend the discussions, the panel talks, and etc., to express their own position, their own visions for the future. That is number one. We should expect the second on-site bilateral meetings in between of the representatives of different countries will lead to probably coming up with some solutions and ideas for the future cooperation. I expect that the countries from the Organization of Turkic States will once again demonstrate the unity and the willingness to work on many directions, including the energies, the renewables, economic cooperation, logistics, trade, and etc. The middle corridor, we cannot ignore that in all official meetings and large discussions are the middle corridor and transport links are being highlighted, most of that. Middle corridor is now indeed, it's a very important project, not only for the countries who are involved. It's China, Central Asia, South Caucasus, probably Armenia through the Zangezur corridor, Turkey and Europe, but it also matters for many other countries. Specifically within this more than a month of war in the Middle East, we could see that the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz already resulted in the oil prices globally, far beyond the geographical borders. So the consequences of any military confrontation are quite visible in all of the world. So having an alternative routes and secure routes, it's a number one topic and number one issue the countries are willing to work. And what Azerbaijan, together with the Central Asian countries and overall within the Organization of Turkic States offering to the global world, it's something that matters and that having a huge interest from the superpowers. And as I mentioned it before many times, probably Zangezur corridor or TRIP as it's being mentioned, and the middle corridor itself, it's one of the rare cases when the countries from the East and West, China, Russia, and the United States are willing to see for the future, willing to see the development of this corridor and this project. Probably this is one of the rare cases when they all have the same opinion.
Yes, indeed. And finally, Anastasia, how is Azerbaijan looking to position itself amongst this community? Clearly there's a lot that the country can do to help and support many of those other countries. Just give us a sense of how they're positioning themselves.
First and most, it's that Azerbaijan already positioned itself as a regional hub from the perspective of transport logistics. Second, it's a reliable energy partner. As we already said, Azerbaijan export the energy sources to 16 countries, and most of them are from the European Union. They served as a peace promoter, peace builder, specifically on the example of what we see between Armenia and Azerbaijan within the last year. Then the reliable partner and mediator, the platform where the global powers and other countries who are willing to find out the solution and find the solution of the conflict, to end the conflict, are willing to meet all together and discuss this. So it's a good platform, it's a good mediator, even to what is happening in the Middle East. Remember when we had a big delegation from the United States, it was stated out that Azerbaijan has a good relations with both, with Iran and Israel. So, meaning that for the future, any type of negotiations, probably some parts of the may take place in Azerbaijan. For us, for Azerbaijan, I can mention that for now, it's very important to have a final peace agreement with Armenia. Once we have it, much more perspective will be opened, not only for the region itself, but for the global superpowers who will have to, who will actually understand the importance and the matter of the region itself for the global agenda and for the huge upcoming projects that will take place.
Fascinating stuff. Anastasia, it's great to have you back in the studio with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, after the break, we'll take a look at the top business news stories shaping the day with Andy Mioch. Don't go away. Welcome back. You're watching Primetime now. Andy Mioch is here with the latest business news stories of the day. Andy, what's on your agenda tonight?
Well, Guy, the International Monetary Fund slashed its outlook due to the Iran war. Global energy and financial leaders are warning against hoarding energy supplies, and there's also some news on European steel tariffs. So let's have a look. And we're starting with a big one. The IMF says the global economy is at risk of recession if the US-Israel war with Iran continues and high energy prices persist. In its World Economic Outlook report, the IMF said in a worst-case scenario, global growth could fall below 2% in 2026.
The International Monetary Fund cut its growth outlook on Tuesday due to Iran war-driven energy price spikes and supply disruptions. It warned that the global economy would teeter on the brink of recession if the conflict worsens and oil stays above $100 per barrel through 2027. With uncertainty over the Middle East conflict gripping finance officials gathering for IMF and World Bank spring meetings in Washington, the IMF presented 3 growth scenarios: weaker, worse and severe, depending on how the war unfolds. The World Economic Outlook's most optimistic reference scenario assumes a short-lived Iran war and forecasts 3.1% real GDP growth for 2026. Under this scenario, oil prices average $82 per barrel for all of 2026. Under an adverse scenario of a longer conflict that keeps oil prices around $100 per barrel this year and $75 in 2027, the IMF predicts global GDP growth would fall to 2.5% this year. And the IMF's worst-case severe scenario assumes an extended and deepening conflict and much higher oil prices that prompt major financial market dislocations and tighter financial conditions, slashing global growth to 2%. The IMF said this would mean a close call for a global recession.
Oil prices, meanwhile, slid as investors bet on a resolution to the Middle East war, even as the U.S. blockaded Iran's ports after the collapse of peace talks at the weekend. According to sources cited by Reuters, negotiating teams from the U.S. and Iran could return to Islamabad this week.
Brent crude oil futures slipped toward $98 per barrel on Tuesday, amid signs the US and Iran may resume talks following Washington's move to impose a blockade on the Strait of Hormuz. Discussions are underway to hold another round of negotiations before a 2-week ceasefire expires, with reports suggesting talks could take place in Pakistan. The sides failed to reach an agreement after extended weekend negotiations, prompting Trump to announce a blockade on Iranian oil shipments. Meanwhile, the International Energy Agency warned the conflict could erase global oil demand growth this year, marking the first annual decline since the pandemic. On Monday, the International Monetary Fund, World Bank, and the IEA warned against hoarding supplies or imposing export controls. They said those moves could worsen what they called the biggest shock ever to hit the sector. Since the conflict began on February 28th, crude prices are up around 50%. With gas and fertilizer prices also rising, fueling concerns about food security and job losses.
U.S. oil giant Chevron and the government of Venezuela signed 2 deals that will expand oil production in the country as Caracas seeks to boost private investment in the sector. The agreement sees Chevron increasing its stake in a joint venture it has with the Venezuelan state oil company, and in return, the U.S. company will hand over some rights to offshore gas extraction.
Chevron signed 2 key agreements on Monday to expand operations at Venezuela's vast Orinoco belt, including an asset swap adding an extra heavy crude area to its main project, while returning an offshore gas field and a small crude area. The agreements are among the first big expansion deals since the US launched a $100 billion reconstruction plan for Venezuela's energy sector after capturing President Nicolas Maduro. A sweeping reform of the country's main oil law was approved in January, encouraging foreign investment. The pacts, expected to allow the US major to boost crude output and participation at the OPEC country's main oil region, were signed by company executives and officials from state-owned company PDVSA in the presence of acting President Delcy Rodriguez. The deals include the increase of Chevron's stake at one of its joint ventures with PDVSA in the Orinoco, Petroindependencia, to 49% from a previous 35.8%. The company also agreed to relinquish 2 gas blocks that include the coveted Lauren offshore field and its stake at a small oil project in western Venezuela, while receiving a new oil area, Ayacucho 8, as part of its existing Petropia project, also in the Orinoco, the company's largest. The deals give Chevron, PDVSA's main joint venture partner, a strong foot to expand heavy oil projects in the country amid expected increased competition with foreign companies.
In tariff news, EU lawmakers and member states agreed to double levies on foreign steel to 50% in an effort to shield the bloc's struggling industry from a surge in cheap Chinese imports. The deal also cuts duty-free import volumes by 47%.
The European Union reached a preliminary deal on Monday to nearly halve imports of steel and impose tariffs of 50% on excess shipments to protect the bloc's steel industry from overproduction elsewhere. EU steel producers are operating at only 65% capacity due to rising imports and 50% tariffs imposed by US President Donald Trump. The new measures are designed to push capacity utilization up to 80%. Representatives for the European Parliament and the Council, the body representing EU governments, agreed late on Monday to limit tariff-free imports to 18.3 million metric tons per year, a 47% cut compared to 2024, with a doubling of the out-of-quota duties. EU steel is currently protected by safeguards put in place during Trump's first term, with import quotas and 25% tariffs above those limits. However, under World Trade Organization rules, they must expire after 8 years, on June 30th. The new measures will take more into account where imported steel was originally melted and poured to avoid circumvention and be regularly reviewed to ensure they are effective. The Parliament and Council will need to vote on Monday's agreement for the measures to enter into force.
Over in Asia, the founder of China Evergrande Group, the world's most indebted property developer, pleaded guilty to charges including misuse of funds, fundraising fraud, and illegally taking public deposits, according to a court in Shenzhen. Charges could lead to jail for life.
The founder of China Evergrande Group pleaded guilty to multiple charges on Monday and Tuesday. Hui Kaiyan faced charges including misuse of funds, fundraising fraud, and illegally taking public deposits. A court in Shenzhen City said he pleaded guilty and expressed remorse. China Evergrande is the world's most indebted property developer. It has defaulted since 2021 on most of its $300 billion liabilities. 67-year-old Hui hadn't been seen in public since Chinese authorities detained him 3 years ago after Evergrande defaulted. The court said Hui and the company also face charges of illegally extending loans, fraudulently issuing securities, and bribery by units. A date for the verdicts hasn't been announced. Evergrande's failure to repay billions of dollars of wealth management products led to protests. That's as ordinary investors, many of them on lower incomes, saw their holdings wiped out. Illegal fundraising can lead to jail for life and confiscation of property as maximum penalties, while bribery can also bring life terms.
And finally, automaker Tesla announced plans to gradually expand from vehicle manufacturing into the energy sector. During a media tour at a Tesla Gigafactory in Shanghai, Tesla China's general manager said the company was also preparing for the era of robotics.
Tesla signaled a push into robotics during a media tour of its Shanghai Gigafactory and Megafactory on Tuesday, as the US automaker also highlighted broader expansion plans in China. At the Gigafactory, during the tour organized by China's State Council Information Office, vehicles moved along the production line in one of Tesla's most important markets. Outside the megafactory building, Tesla displayed a new 6-seat Model YL, a long wheelbase version of its best-selling sport utility vehicle launched for the Chinese market. The visit comes as competition in China's electric vehicle sector intensifies, with domestic automakers and foreign brands vying for market share in the world's largest EV market. Tesla China General Manager Wang Hao said the Shanghai Gigafactory was gradually expanding from vehicle manufacturing into the energy sector, referring to Tesla's growing focus on energy storage. Looking ahead, Wang said Tesla was also preparing for the era of robotics, adding that the Shanghai Gigafactory would, like Tesla's other gigafactories, play an important role as a production base for robotics and other future products.
And that's all in the business brief for tonight. Handing it back to you, Guy.
Great to see you, Andy. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Okay, after the break, we'll take a look at Pope Leo's visit to Algeria and the message he's delivering on unity and global divisions. Don't go away. Welcome back. You're watching Primetime. Pope Leo is in Algeria, using his visit to deliver a message of unity and interfaith dialogue, with calls for reconciliation alongside criticism of global divisions. This trip is drawing attention for its broader political and religious significance.
Pope Leo has continued his visit to Algeria with a stop at the Great Mosque of Algiers, where he was welcomed by Sheikh Mohammed Mamoun al-Kachimi al-Hochini. He toured the site, signed a commemorative message and received a souvenir shield as part of a broader trip focused on interfaith dialogue. He later visited the Basilica of Our Lady of Africa in the capital, where he met members of the clergy and addressed attendees, calling for unity and reconciliation.
In a world where divisions and wars sow pain and death between nations, in communities and even within families, your united and peaceful life is a powerful sign. United, you spread fraternity, inspiring in those around you desires and feelings of communion and reconciliation, with a message all the more powerful and clear for being borne witness to in simplicity and humility.
He also used his address to criticize what he described as violations of international law by neo-colonial powers, speaking in the wider context of his Africa tour. The Pope said his visit is a message of peace and hope, noting Africa's major role in global Catholicism, even as Algeria remains overwhelmingly Muslim with a small Catholic community. He also met members of the missionary Augustinian Sisters in Algiers, a Catholic religious congregation present in 17 countries. At 70 years old, Pope Leo is undertaking a multi-country African tour covering Algeria, Cameroon, Angola and Equatorial Guinea, spanning 11 cities and towns and nearly 18,000 kilometers of travel.
Okay, let's bring in now Abdenoor Toumi, a political analyst who is joining us from Algiers. Abdenoor, very good indeed to see you. Thanks for joining us on Primetime. Let's just start off then with this. How significant is this visit for Algeria right now?
Good evening, and thank you for having me on the program. Actually, yeah, it is significant for Algeria. And this visit, it's a historic visit. That is the first time a Pope who made a state visit to Algeria, and this visit comes in a world at war, and the international politics is in turmoil. So the visit has, of course, unique symbolism, and symbolism is important in politics, so that in geopolitics. And one has to remember the visit of His Holiness Leo XIV. Actually, it is his third visit to a Muslim Mediterranean country. He did make a visit last year to Turkey and Lebanon, and now to Algeria. And so when you see the trajectory of the geography, it's important on the Mediterranean, which is a birth of civilizations, and how the religion, monotheist religions are connected. So it is important for Algeria also when it comes to its foreign policy determinant, and it is a soft power that element that Algeria will be actually benefiting and using as a pivotal state in its geopolitics and geoeconomics landscape. So this is why this visit is important, and also the geographic position and geostrategic position of Algeria gave to Algiers to have this window to be a bridge between Africa and the Mediterranean, and when we speak about the Mediterranean, evidently toward Europe.
And we've seen a clear contrast in tone, haven't we, here, including that image that Donald Trump posted of himself depicted as Jesus. I mean, some people saying that it was really just an image of a doctor or something similar, and actually there's really nothing to worry about. Others profoundly offended by it. How is that being interpreted, especially alongside the Pope's message?
Actually, it's again not elegant picture nor statement toward His Holiness Pope Leo XIV. And I mean, now everybody knows President Donald Trump with his provocations and how he portrays himself on world stage. And again, of course, I mean, President Donald Trump and the large majority of Americans are not Catholics, but interestingly enough, I mean, the Pope himself, he is a son of Chicago and he is an American. So, and of course, it does fund 1.4 billion Catholic billions across the world, and also, I mean, to all religions as well. But again, it's still part of President Donald Trump, a provocation style, and I don't think the Pope and his entourage, I mean, His Holiness the Pope Leo XIV and his entourage has been paying attention much to what President Donald Trump have said about him. And of course, I mean, what the Pope, His Holiness the Pope Leo XIV knew or doctrine vis-a-vis the southern people in the south, and particularly when it comes to the Palestinian cause, it does. And through the President Donald Trump policies and wars that he has been waging, and for instance, in Iran lately.
It's a difficult balance, isn't it, for the Pope? Because on the one hand, he of course has to connect with people. He has to stay true to what he believes and his calling. On the other hand, he needs to be careful not to get embroiled in shaping political thinking, particularly in this region. Just give us a sense of your evaluation of how well he is sort of treading that tightrope.
And totally, yeah, he is in this difficult position, and I mean, because of his role to bring fraternity and tolerance and having that discourse of brotherhood and so on. While the entire now, I mean, the world is in turmoil, and especially international politics, and we saw how the international community is totally divided, and it's very hard now for him, for His Holiness the Pope Leo XIV, to position himself in this time of international instability. But having said that, I mean, he still has, I mean, he has this role, a moral role, not only in Christian world, but also vis-a-vis the Muslims also and other religions like the Jews, for instance, I mean, who have, they show respect for him, because all this is about respect and tolerance and accepting the other. But again, when it comes to the geopolitics and the current international politics, that is in disarray, and it's heading to a known, and also we are in the process of the international order, or the world order is under construction, or new parameters are had to be seen. We don't know when, soon or sooner or later, but will shape the international politics, so that I think the policy of the Vatican is ahead, or having a strategy for that, how to deal with international conflicts and wars, and particularly, his visit now to Algeria, and then he's going to visit other African countries. And when we speak about the African country, it has that cliche about political instability, famine, and chaos. So the message of His Holiness Paul Leo XIV is about this, bringing that message of hope. And indeed, there is this ray of hope that will be seen in the future. And of course, the entire humanity is looking forward for that, because, again, we saw after the banality of the brutality and the impunity, so there is a hope for the humanity.
And you're obviously in Algiers right now. How do you see the Pope's message landing? Is it cutting through? And is it cutting through beyond just the religious space?
Totally. It has like a positive echo, and the national media is covering this event, as actually, again, are involved in it. And even it's across the political parties and the political party spectrum. So, and even the people, who are very, very, open about that. And this is its sense for Algerian people. They have that blood, Mediterranean blood, and welcoming and tolerance, and that they pledge tolerance and respect, and pushing to build bridges, intercultural and interfaith bridges, and all this, it's a positive sign. And this is, again, I think that's how his message, the message of His Holiness Leo XIV, the Pope Leo XIV, his message has, well resonated in the entire country. And now we saw today he's in his second day visit. he headed toward Annaba, and Annaba is the birthplace of a bishop and a scholar and a Christian, a Catholic Christian, Saint Augustine, who is actually, inspired the Pope himself, and the thought of school in the Vatican. And so all these are making actually Algerian proud of their culture, heritage culture, and then of their tolerance.
Yes. Mr. Toumi, great to speak to you. Great to have you in Algiers there for us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, after the break, we will check in with our correspondents around the world for the very latest developments in their regions. Don't go away. Welcome back. Israel and Lebanon are set to hold rare direct talks in Washington on Tuesday, their highest level contact in decades. A News' Ube Shobanda has more from Washington.
Israel and Lebanon will hold direct meetings between their ambassadors for the first time in a very long time here in Washington, D.C. on Tuesday morning, as direct negotiations between the two countries officially kicks off. Israel and the Iranian-backed militia group Lebanese Hezbollah have been locked in bitter fighting that has recently seen a major ground incursion by the Israeli Defense Forces into southern Lebanon. Secretary of State Marco Rubio will host Israeli ambassador to the U.S. Michael Yechiel and the Lebanese ambassador Nada Hamadeh in what will be the highest level direct meeting between an Israeli and Lebanese official since the early 1990s. The talks will focus on the possibility of a ceasefire and the longer-term disarmament of Hezbollah. The talks could also pave the way for later discussions on a peace deal between Lebanon and Israel. In the lead up to the meeting, the Trump administration have asked Israel reportedly for a pause in its ongoing strikes against Hezbollah in Lebanon. State Department officials told reporters in Washington that Hezbollah's recent actions against Israel are endangering the security of all Lebanese people, and that Hezbollah's actions are the reason why the Lebanese and Israeli governments are now engaging in direct high-level diplomatic talks brokered by the United States. That's the view here in Washington. American diplomats say that the direct talks will focus on guaranteeing long-term security for Israel's northern border and for the necessary steps that have to be taken to support the government of Lebanon's capacity to operate without the political and military interference of Hezbollah and its sovereignty. Hezbollah still maintains significant influence over Lebanese political life. The United States have designated Hezbollah as a foreign terrorist organization and sees the Iranian-backed proxy as a major threat to regional stability in the Middle East. Ube Shubander, A News, Washington.
In the UK, a new push to reset ties with Brussels is reigniting debate over how Britain balances economic pragmatism with parliamentary control. With proposals aimed at easing alignment with European rules, the plan is already drawing sharp political divisions at home. Zainab Farazada has more.
UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer is preparing controversial new legislation that could allow the UK to adopt future EU laws without a full parliamentary vote each time. The proposal is designed to make it easier for Britain to align with European rules in key areas like food standards, carbon pricing and electricity trading as a part of a broader effort to reset relations with Brussels after Brexit. Under the plans, ministers would be able to introduce changes through so-called secondary legislation, a fast-track process that limits debate and scrutiny in Parliament. The government insists MPs and peers will still have a role in overseeing these decisions, but critics argue their influence would be significantly reduced. The move has triggered a strong opposition from both the Conservatives and Reform UK, who say it risks handing too much power to ministers and undermining parliamentary sovereignty. Supporters, however, argue closer alignment with the EU could cut trade barriers, lower costs and boost economic stability at a time of global uncertainty. Speaking in Parliament, the Prime Minister said the economic and security benefits of stronger ties with Europe are too big to ignore, pointing to recent global shocks, including conflict in the Middle East and ongoing economic pressures. The legislation is expected later this year and would underpin future agreements with the EU. But the plan is politically sensitive. Unlike before Brexit, the UK would be aligning with rules it no longer has a direct role in shaping. The government argues this is a pragmatic step forward. Opponents say it looks like a step back. Either way, the debate over Britain's post-Brexit future is far from over. Zainab Farazada, A News, Manchester, United Kingdom.
Back now to tensions around the Strait of Hormuz. European countries are working on proposals aimed at securing global shipping and stabilising the situation around this critical energy route.
Welcome to This Day in Europe, where the UK and France are stepping up diplomatic efforts to secure one of the world's most critical routes, as U.S. President Donald Trump announces a blockade of shipping to and from Iranian ports has begun. Trump said Iran is doing, quote, absolutely no business, signaling a sharp escalation in tensions. That move comes amid mounting disruption in the Strait of Hormuz, a choke point for roughly a fifth of global oil supply, raising fresh concerns over energy prices and supply chains. Against that backdrop, Britain and France will co-host talks this week on a possible multinational naval mission aimed at safeguarding commercial shipping. French President Emmanuel Macron stressed that the plan would be strictly defensive, separate from the conflict, and deployed only when conditions allow. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer warned the crisis is already driving up costs and hitting global trade, with knock-on effects for households and businesses. Crucially, this European-led effort signals a different approach from Washington. London has made it clear it will not join the U.S. blockade, instead pushing for a coordinated multinational plan focused on de-escalation and freedom of navigation. The talks build on momentum from last week's virtual meeting involving about 40 countries, including Canada, India, the UAE, and Germany, exploring ways to secure safe passage through the strait. While no formal coalition has been agreed, the discussions highlight a growing international push for a multilateral rather than U.S.-led response to one of the most critical flashpoints in global trade. For A News, I'm Anita Sharma in Arnhem, Netherlands.
Turkey's Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan is urging a diplomatic reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, warning that a military solution would be risky and difficult. Well, his comments come as debate grows over how to secure this vital shipping route without escalating tensions further.
Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan said Monday that the Strait of Hormuz should be reopened as soon as possible through diplomatic means. Speaking at a press event in Ankara, he warned that any military solution would be fraught with difficulties. Our position is to reopen the strait through peace, he told reporters, adding that no country wanted to be drawn into a war against Iran. Fidan noted that European countries had also expressed a reluctance to escalate the situation. He stressed that Turkey, too, wanted to remain outside the conflict while contributing to a diplomatic solution that would ensure the waterway remains open. He also warned that stability in the Persian Gulf cannot be achieved through military means, saying U.S. proposals for an armed force tasked with reopening the strait would face serious challenges. Fidan made the remarks as discussions continue over a proposal by U.S. President Donald Trump to create an international mechanism to secure shipping lanes. Fidan described the strait as a critical choke point, warning that continued disruptions affect not only energy markets, but also petrochemical supply chains and broader industrial production. The waterway handles roughly a fifth of all international oil shipments, making it vital to the global economy. Fidan said Turkey is not heavily dependent on the strait for its own energy needs. Nevertheless, he said, Turkey remains vulnerable to global price shocks caused by the waterway's continued closure. On the same day, Fidan held separate phone calls with his Russian and Saudi counterparts to discuss possible diplomatic solutions to the crisis. Details of those conversations, however, were not immediately made available. This is Adam Morrow for A News in Istanbul, Turkey.
Georgia's role as a key transit corridor in the South Caucasus is coming into sharper focus as new transport developments begin to reshape regional logistics. With alternative routes emerging, the region's long-standing trade dynamics could be entering a period of transition. Nini Nikolashvili picked up the story.
Georgia's role as a key transit corridor in the South Caucasus has been indirectly highlighted by Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan, who referenced ongoing railway exports through Georgian territory while outlining new transport developments. Although mentioned briefly, Georgia remains central to the region's current logistics systems. For years, Georgia has effectively served as the primary transit route for Armenia, particularly due to close borders with Azerbaijan and Turkey. That dynamic is now beginning to change. According to Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan, railway cargo transportation via Azerbaijan has become possible. This signals the gradual lifting of long-standing transport constraints and introduces an alternative route that could reshape regional trade flows. A key component of this shift is the planned TRIP project, which is expected to expand connectivity between Armenia and external markets further. If implemented, it could create additional transit options, reducing dependency on a single corridor and increasing route flexibility. These developments are closely tied to the broader peace process between Armenia and Azerbaijan. The reopening of transport export links is not only a political breakthrough but also a structural economic shift, enabling the reconfiguration of logistics across the South Caucasus. For Georgia, this transition presents a more complex reality. The emergence of alternative routes introduces direct competition, potentially affecting transit volumes that previously flowed almost exclusively through Georgian territory. At the same time, existing challenges such as infrastructure bottlenecks, long implementation timelines for major projects, and capacity limitations may become more visible in a competitive environment. Nini Nikolaishvili, Tbilisi, A News.
Well, as we've been hearing, diplomatic tensions between Washington and Tehran are intensifying following the collapse of talks and fresh threats around the Strait of Hormuz. With warnings on both sides and regional actors now engaged, concerns are growing over the risk of further escalation. A News' Toraj Shirililo has more.
It's the 7th day of ceasefire between Iran, US and Israel, and I am reporting from downtown Tehran, where a large billboard reads, "The Strait of Hormuz will remain closed to Iran's enemies." The Iranian president, Masoud Pezeshkian, has said that while excessive demands of the United States led to the failure of negotiations in Pakistan, Tehran is ready to continue the talks with Washington based on international law. He made this statement in a phone call with the French President Emmanuel Macron on Monday. The Iranian chief executive also slammed the US threat of blockade of Iranian ships in the Strait of Hormuz. In a related development, Iran's Khatam al-Anbiya Central Command seriously warned against threatening Iranian port security in the country's sovereign waters, saying no port in the Persian Gulf or the Sea of Oman will be safe. The spokesman, Lieutenant Colonel Ebrahim Zulfaqari, said that port security in the region must either be for all countries or none of the parties will enjoy it. Also, Iran's Revolutionary Guards said that it will use new military capabilities if the Israeli-US war with Iran continues. Meantime, Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi held phone calls with his Omani, Saudi, Qatari, Egyptian and Russian counterparts. According to local media quoting foreign minister statements, their talks focus on the latest developments in the region, including possible Tehran-Washington renewed negotiations and the US naval blockade of Iranian ports. Toraj Shirililo, Tehran, for A News.
Economic ties between Afghanistan and Uzbekistan appear to be gaining momentum, with fresh efforts underway to deepen cooperation across trade and agriculture. Well, the latest round of talks point to a broader push to expand connectivity and investment between these two neighbours. Tamim Bahis has the details.
In the latest sign of growing engagement between Kabul and Tashkent, Afghanistan's Minister of Agriculture, Irrigation and Livestock has held talks with Uzbek officials and traders on expanding bilateral cooperation in agricultural and trade sectors. According to the Ministry of Agriculture, the meeting focused on a number of key issues, including the export of Afghan meat to Uzbekistan, the supply of agricultural machinery, and steps to make transit processes easier between the two countries. In a statement, the Ministry of Agriculture said Uzbek officials welcomed the start of Afghan meat exports and underscored importance of increasing investment and broadening cooperation in the future. Meanwhile, Afghanistan's Minister of Industry and Commerce, Nuruddin Azizi, also met with Governor of Adijan, Sharat Beg Abdurrahmanov, to discuss ways to strengthen economic and trade relations, attract investment and raise the overall volume of trade between the two countries. Those talks included possible investment in fertilized and table egg production, cement manufacturing inside Afghanistan, cotton processing, leather shoe production in Uzbekistan, and the facilitation of vehicle transit under an agreement allowing at least 1,000 trucks per day. The Andijan governor also proposed setting up a library in Bagh-e-Babur and launching direct flights between Andijan and Kabul in a move aimed at boosting tourism, cultural exchange, and a broader joint cooperation. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, A News.
Kazakhstan's economy is facing new pressure as disruptions to key export routes begin to weigh on energy output. With oil no longer driving growth, questions are emerging over how the country sustains momentum in the months ahead. Fariza Kalamazina sent us this report earlier.
Oil production in Kazakhstan has fallen sharply, according to First Vice Minister of National Economy Azamat Amrin speaking at a government meeting. He said the country's real GDP growth reached 3% in the first quarter, but the contribution of the oil sector to the economy has halved. Amrin added that the economic growth this year will be maintained without a positive contribution from the oil industry. Energy Minister Yerlan Akkenjenov said the decline in the oil and gas sector is linked to developments involving the Caspian Pipeline Consortium and the Tengiz oil field. He noted that oil exports totaled 15.3 million tons in the first 3 months of the year, or 78.5% compared to the same period in 2025, while the full-year export forecast remains at 76 million tons. The Caspian Pipeline Consortium system continues to act as a key bottleneck, handling around 80% of Kazakhstan's oil exports. The route, which connects western oil fields to the Black Sea, has been under strain since autumn 2025 amid reported damage to energy infrastructure in the context of the war in Ukraine. According to experts, Kazakhstan may have lost more than $2 billion in revenue since autumn of last year due to disruptions in supply and constraints in oil transport infrastructure. Fariza Kalimurzina, Almaty, A News.
China is stepping up its diplomatic engagement in the Middle East, outlining a new framework aimed at reducing tension and promoting regional stability. Well, the move signals Beijing's growing ambition to play a more active role in shaping security and dialogue across the region. For more, we go to Manor Makdoum.
China has put forward a 4-point proposal aimed at promoting peace and stability in the Middle East during talks in Beijing between President Xi Jinping and Sheikh Khalid bin Mohammed, Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, United Arab Emirates. President Xi called for adherence to the principle of peaceful coexistence, stressing the need to build a common, comprehensive, cooperative and sustainable security architecture for the Middle East and the Gulf region. He also emphasized respect for national sovereignty, stating that the sovereignty, security, and territorial integrity of countries in the region must be upheld, while the safety of personnel, facilities, and institutions should be safeguarded. On the principle of international rule of law, President Xi urged all parties to uphold international norms to prevent a return to what he described as a law of the jungle in global affairs. The Chinese president further highlighted the importance of coordinating development and security, calling on all sides to work together to create a stable environment conducive to long-term growth in the Middle East and the Gulf region. The proposal shows Beijing's continued push to position itself as a mediator and supporter of political dialogue and regional stability. Manu Maktoum, A News, Beijing.
After the break, we'll take a look at how disruption in the Strait of Hormuz is starting to hit businesses and consumers in the United States. Don't go away. A warm welcome back to Primetime wherever you're watching. Disruption, as we've heard, is spreading through one of the world's most critical shipping routes as escalating tensions begin to hit global trade and energy flows. In the United States, businesses and consumers are already feeling the impact as rising fuel costs start to bite.
Ships have begun reversing course in the Strait of Hormuz, following a US announcement of a blockade on Iranian ports, according to London-based maritime intelligence provider Lloyd's List. The disruption comes as Washington steps up mine-clearing operations in the region and accuses Tehran of failing to meet commitments to reopen the waterway. Pakistani-mediated talks in Islamabad failed to yield a breakthrough, leaving no clear end to the conflict in sight. Amid the stalemate, the economic fallout is hitting home. Small business owners are already feeling the burn as rising fuel costs squeeze their margins.
Everything is going up. Groceries, everything. And I just want to be one of those business owners that's able to give back, able to be fair and even around the board. And sometimes it does seem like it's a war as far as the customers, because they'll see things and they want it, but of course they can't get it.
It isn't just the supply chain for goods, it's the fuel required to move them. At the pump, consumers are seeing prices move quickly, and some warn relief may not come fast, even if supply routes reopen.
I don't drive myself, but I mean, like I went by I've noticed these things. Like I think about even 2 weeks ago it was $3.50 a gallon, and a couple of days ago it was $4.19. So it's, and according to people who know about these things, even if they open up the strait tomorrow, there's going to be such a backlog. It's not like they open the strait and prices go down right away.
Beyond the economic pressure, the conflict is also fueling political frustration and uncertainty over where the war goes next.
The cost of everything that we do is going up. And the income for everything that we do is going down. And just availability of stuff is also getting to be a challenge. And then I've got so many friends that I've got, customers who can't afford to shop with us anymore. I've got farmer friends who've gone bankrupt. What are we getting? We're ruining our position in the world. We're being the bad guys. We're ruining the world economy, and we're gaining nothing. So,
for now, Americans are left to balance the fast-moving headlines against the reality of their own balance sheets, waiting for a diplomatic breakthrough that has yet to arrive.
OK, let's bring in now A-News' Katie Wilson, who's been tracking the impact in the United States. Katie, very good indeed to see you. When we think of businesses, Katie, we often think of big corporations, but of course most businesses are small ones. And when you listen to the people there, it kind of really brought it home, didn't it? How typical are those sorts of experiences?
Absolutely, and I think you're right. The impact is felt across the board, but it is felt rather unevenly. So it is going to be these small businesses in terms of transport, agriculture, logistics that are going to be under that growing pressure, and equally lower income households are going to be feeling this more, because food make up a larger share of their spending, and also in rural places, rural Americans might be hit harder here, as they're more reliant on driving. So absolutely this impact is widespread, but there are pockets of people that are going to be feeling it more. And when we're talking about 20% of the world's oil supply passing through the Strait of Hormuz, it's unsurprising that when this is disrupted, it's going to start rippling through to American households. So as we saw in that VT, the clearest and most immediate effect for everyday Americans is at the petrol station, but the impact does go well beyond that. So higher oil prices ripple through almost every part of the economy. So food prices, they rise because fertilizers and transport costs increase. Airfares and delivery costs go up due to surging jet fuel and diesel prices, and everyday goods just become more expensive as shipping and manufacturing costs climb. And there are already warnings that this could trigger a broader supply shock, affecting everything from plastics to industrial materials, and not just energy. So even Americans that don't drive are still feeling the squeeze in supermarkets, online shopping and utility bills. And I think what makes this interesting, if we think back to 2016, energy independence was a significant political slogan for President Trump during his first term, where he pushed for more fossil fuel production to eliminate a reliance on foreign oil. But I think this crisis is exposing the limits of that policy, and that idea is, yes, the US may produce a lot of its own oil, but it still operates in a globally interconnected market. So when prices surge internationally, they feed directly into domestic inflation, and supply chains disruptions, that's what can't be insulated domestically. So what we're seeing now, I think, is that energy independence doesn't necessarily mean economic immunity for crises like this.
Yeah, and of course, as you say, many different aspects of life have been impacted. Of course, for Americans, feeling that price pressure at the pump is particularly significant, isn't it? Politicians always pay particular attention to it because it is so important. What's going on at the moment with fuel prices?
Yes, as we were hearing in that VT, that is where the impact is being felt the hardest for Americans. So petrol prices have jumped above $4 a gallon compared to under $3 just a couple of months ago. And in some projections, prices could approach $5 a gallon if disruption persists. And that's already translating into a noticeable hit on weekly household budgets. And what's striking here, I think, is just how fast the prices have moved and how sensitive they are to every twist in the conflict. So prices have risen around $1 a gallon in just a few weeks, and that's roughly a 30 to 40% increase, one of the fastest climbs in decades. So in March alone, prices jumped over 20% month on month, which is the sharpest monthly rise since the 1960s. And even after the temporary ceasefire news, the prices barely moved, which shows the market is still pricing in risk. And I think there's a cultural point here, which I think you kind of touched upon, that Americans drive significantly more than Europeans. And on average, Americans travel about twice as many miles annually as residents of Germany, France, or the UK. That's due to higher car dependency, longer commuting distances, and less developed public transport outside of major cities. And in the US, driving is often a daily necessity for work and errands rather than a luxury as Europeans may think of it as. In American city planning and infrastructure, it's all built around driving. And America's summer holiday season is going to be looming as well, and I think as we know, Americans are far more likely to drive than take a flight to go on holiday, you know, the American road trip. So the White House are going to really be needing petrol prices to fall back to where they were before the war, because this is not what you want ahead of midterms in November.
It's not, no. And Katie, everybody's hoping that the Strait of Hormuz does fully reopen again soon. But I believe many experts have pointed out that even if it does, it might take some time for those positive ripple effects to work through.
Exactly, and that's often the point that catches people off guard, that even if the Strait of Hormuz reopens tomorrow and goes back to normal, prices at the pump don't necessarily snap back like that. And most experts are warning of the opposite, that the relief is likely to be slow, uneven, and a matter of months rather than days. And this guidance is coming from the US Energy Information Administration, which says fuel prices could remain elevated for several months even after flows resume. And there's a few reasons for that. Obviously, supply chains take time to reset, tankers are out of position, ports are congested, and insurance costs remain high. Production isn't going to instantly recover from this, and stockpiles also need rebuilding before prices can properly stabilize. And even once oil starts moving normally again, it still has to be refined, transported, and distributed, which adds further delay before consumers start seeing that relief in their bank balance and those prices to return to normal. And another key factor is what analysts call the risk premium. So even if the strait technically reopens, markets don't immediately assume that everything is back to normal again. So traders will keep prices elevated because the threat of disruption hasn't fully disappeared. And that premium can add $10 to $15 a barrel or more to oil prices, purely based on that uncertainty and that risk. So in practical terms, the ships could be moving again, but the prices may still stay high because the market doesn't trust that stability just yet.
Katie, America's long been the place where you can get anything you want, you know, the home of consumerism. But is there some evidence that actually the availability of goods is starting to be restricted?
Yes, so we're not at that point yet. We're not looking at shortages just yet, and we're more still looking at price increases rather than outright shortages. But economists are warning about that and a shift towards that if this disruption continues. So some goods, particularly imported goods, may become harder to source, and delays in shipping could lead to gaps in availability. And businesses may also have to reduce their inventory and their stockpile to manage costs, which, like you say, could make supermarket shelves more vulnerable to disruption. And I think this is where you see how a disruption in the Strait of Hormuz could just ripple into every part of the economy. So every day, Americans will experience what economists call second round inflation. And what that means is, as these energy prices are rising, businesses are going to have to start passing these costs on. So food prices will climb because farming depends heavily on fertilizers, fuel and transport. Supermarket goods will become more expensive due to higher shipping and packaging costs. And even online shopping and deliveries, they're seeing surcharges as logistics firms absorb those higher diesel prices. So even something as simple as a loaf of bread will be affected because fuel is used at every stage from production to distribution. And yeah, this the risk today isn't necessarily widespread shortages, but targeted temporary disruptions if these supply chains tighten further.
And what about the media, Katie, in the US? How are the different channels, newspapers, websites framing this?
Well, geopolitics is obviously never going to be far from this. And with the midterm elections approaching in November, media coverage is increasingly going to be linking this to domestic politics. And cost of living, I think, is going to be the defining theme of these midterms. And rising fuel prices are being framed as a potential liability for Trump and the Republicans going into these midterms, and there's scrutiny over how the government is handling both the conflict abroad and inflation at home. And some media outlets in the US are already drawing parallels with past moments where energy shocks shaped voter sentiment. And it's fair to say that this building cost of living crisis probably wasn't on Trump's bingo card when he first struck around back in February. He was probably expecting to go into the midterms with a quick victory, like the US military's kidnapped the Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro. And instead, he's got economic pressure and a fallout from the Iran conflict to deal with. And Trump is currently sitting on an approval rating of around 40% in several major polls. And that is historically a warning zone for presidents heading into the midterms. Like, it has to be said that midterms typically punish the sitting government,
yes.
But yeah, it's dangerous numbers really for Trump and his administration. And I think the key geopolitical take from this is that it shouldn't have actually been a surprise that Iran blocked the strait when it was attacked. And media outlets are picking up on when Iran had threatened to do so in the past. And for decades, contingency planning the impact of a closure was standard practice for foreign ministries in all the countries that depend on shipping that routed through the strait, including the US. So a question that a lot of the media in the US is asking is, Iran has shown that the closing of the Strait of Hormuz has given it that strategic edge. Did Trump dismiss that, or did he simply not understand it when he was having those conversations with Benjamin Netanyahu about going to war?
Interesting stuff. Katie, thank you as always for unpacking that for us. Thank you. Okay, after the break, we'll take a look at Hungary's election results and what it could mean for the country's future direction and ties with Europe. Don't go away. Welcome out, you're watching Primetime. Well, a decisive election result in Hungary is reshaping the country's political landscape, bringing to an end years of entrenched leadership. Attention is now turning to what comes next and how far this shift could alter Budapest's relationship with Europe and its wider alliances.
Hungary is entering a period of political transition after opposition leader Péter Magyar secured a landslide victory, ending the 16-year rule of Viktor Orbán and signalling a broader shift in the country's direction. Magyar's win has been described as a political earthquake, lifting markets and raising hopes Budapest could unlock frozen European Union funds. He has pledged anti-corruption reforms and closer alignment with the EU, marking a clear break from Orbán's confrontational approach. Europe will remain Hungary's core direction, according to Péter Magyar, who outlined a pragmatic foreign policy at his first major news conference. He He said Hungary would maintain ties with Israel, assess EU decisions case by case, and uphold zero tolerance for anti-Semitism, adding that the election reflected a regime change and reaffirming that Hungary's place was, is, and will be in Europe.
And unlike before, it will not interfere in the internal affairs of any country, neither in the internal affairs of the Balkan countries, nor Spain, nor France, neither with money nor in any other way, nor in the internal affairs of Slovakia. We respectfully ask the same from all foreign countries, to view Hungary as a free, independent, sovereign, and at the same time European country, a country that is a member of the two most important and largest alliance systems, the European Union and NATO.
In Washington, J.D. Vance said the US can work well with Hungary's next leader, despite backing Viktor Orban earlier. Magyar also stressed the importance of strong ties with the US and NATO, but said he would not initiate contact with Donald Trump. Peter Magyar said Hungary will keep a practical relationship with Russia due to energy needs while also trying to diversify. He added he would urge Vladimir Putin to end the war and said better ties with Ukraine depend on restoring rights for Hungary's ethnic minority. The Kremlin said it hopes relations with Hungary remain practical. Hungarian PM-elect Peter Magyar on Monday urged Parliament to convene quickly to form a new government, aiming for a May 5th handover.
OK, let's bring in now Dr. Joseph Peter Martin, Executive Director of Transparency International Hungary. Dr. Martin, very good indeed to have you with us. Thank you for joining us tonight on Primetime. Just start us off then, how significant is this result and what does it tell us about the direction that voters want?
Good evening and thank you very much for having me. So it was indeed a revolution and indeed a very silent revolution and peaceful revolution in Hungary. And Peter Magyar had a landslide victory in this country. He got the two-thirds majority in terms of the parliamentary mandates, and it was a clear shift towards his party and a turning away from Fidesz party. Basically, it was not a usual election, it was rather a referendum about the Orban regime, about the outgoing regime, and the people at a large majority voted for the ending of the Orban regime. It was also a kind of geopolitical referendum between the EU and the and Russia, and the people turned towards the EU. People confirmed Hungary's place in the EU.
Yes, I mean, from your perspective, you know, winning, I guess, for all leaders is part of the job. The other, then, I suppose, is doing the work necessary to lead. What are the immediate priorities for this incoming leader?
As the incoming leader of TISA party and incoming Prime Minister Peter Magyar several times indicated, now the first and most pressing issue is the restoring of rule of law and democracy. In other words, to re-establish checks and balances in this country. This is very urgent because the former regime, the regime under Viktor Orban, was not a democracy, it was rather an autocracy. And now we have to re-establish the democratic checks and balances. This is probably the most important task, and there is good chance that with two-thirds majority, with constitutional majority, Peter Magyar and his party can do this job.
It's very interesting this, and obviously you use the term regime or autocracy. You've worked extensively on transparency and governance. That did appear to be a major issue in this election. But for the sake of balance, Dr. Martin, you know, the EU itself has had many corruption allegations in recent years, visa scandals, you know, long Qatargate, lots of different investigations. Do you think Hungary's new leader needs to be careful here, careful about framing this as just sort of good guys versus bad guys?
Certainly, every politician has to be careful when they speak about corruption. But corruption in this country was very peculiar in the past 16 years. It was a systemic kind of corruption. By this, I mean that enormous money, enormous state resources, state money, public money was transferred from the state budget and from the public assets towards the cronies of the government and also the former government politicians, including the surrounding of Prime Minister Orbán. So, in other words, the Hungarian state was captured by particularistic interests, and the state institutions, they did not counter corruption, but they assisted to this kind of systemic corruption. You asked about the corruption in Europe. Of course, it exists as well in the European Union, corruption, but the big difference between corruption in the European Union and corruption what happened here in this country for more than 15 years is that in the EU, if corruption happens, there is a consequence. In Hungary, there was no consequence because the state institutions were captured by government interests. So there were only loyalists at the heads of the state institutions, and that's why the corrupt perpetrators enjoyed impunity.
And just finally, I'd be interested to know what, when you win an election, obviously part of campaigning, you get combative, both sides say very strong words against each other. When you then become the leader, you have to unite a country. Obviously, many, many people in Hungary voted for Viktor Orbán and support him. What does the new leader want to say to them? Presumably he wants to also welcome them too.
So the new leader seemingly avoids to criticize the Fidesz voter. He criticizes the Fidesz politicians and criticizes those people who assisted to this regime in the past 16 years. And he not only criticizes these people, but also he wants to oust these people. He wants them to leave their office as soon as possible. But it's a very interesting time because Péter Magyar and the Tisza Party has a very diverse electorate. So not only left-wing or liberal or conservative people are among the voters of this party, but basically all of them. So the voter base is very, very diverse, and this diverse voter base could win against Fidesz. But obviously, you are right that there are more than 2 million Fidesz voters still. Meanwhile, Tisza had more than 3 million voters. So the new government should avoid to criticize the voters themselves, but should be very tough, in my opinion, to oust those people who assisted to this corrupt regime.
Dr. Martin, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, that does bring us to the end of Primetime for tonight. Please do join us again tomorrow for plenty more news and analysis. And from all of us here in Baku, thanks for watching.